It was a quiet Tuesday evening in the small suburban town of Maplewood. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees that lined the sidewalks. Most people were indoors, winding down after a long day, but not Maya Johnson. She was walking home from her job at the local library, her steps steady and unhurried. To anyone who saw her, she looked like an ordinary woman, tall, poised, with her hair neatly tied back and a tote bag slung over her shoulder. But appearances can be deceiving. Maya wasn't just another resident of Maplewood. Beneath her calm exterior lay a life filled with secrets. In reality, Maya was one of the CIA's most skilled operatives. For years, she had worked undercover, gathering intelligence and carrying out missions that often went unnoticed by the public. Her work required precision, patience, and an ability to blend into any environment without drawing attention to herself. The librarian persona was perfect for her. It gave her access to information, allowed her to interact with people naturally, and provided a convincing cover story. No one in Maplewood suspected that the soft-spoken woman shelving books during the day was also someone capable of dismantling criminal networks or thwarting national security threats. That evening, however, something unusual happened. As Maya turned onto Elm Street, a police cruiser slowed down beside her. Its headlights illuminated the sidewalk, momentarily blinding her. She paused, squinting against the bright light, unsure why they had stopped. Two officers stepped out of the car, their expressions stern. One of them, a burly man with a buzz cut, approached her while the other lingered near the vehicle, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. "Excuse me, ma'am," the first officer said gruffly. "Can we have a word?" Maya nodded politely, keeping her tone even. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her face, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you doing out here this late? You live around here?" "Yes, I do," Maya replied calmly. "I'm just heading home from work. I'm a librarian at the Maplewood Public Library." She gestured toward her tote bag, which contained a few books she had borrowed to read over the weekend. The second officer chimed in, his voice laced with suspicion. "You sure about that? Someone matching your description was seen earlier tonight near the scene of a robbery downtown." Maya frowned, taken aback. "That's impossible. I've been at the library all evening. You can check with my supervisor if you'd like." But the officers weren't interested in explanations. They exchanged a glance before turning back to her. "We need to ask you some more questions," the first officer said. "Come with us." Before Maya could protest, the second officer grabbed her arm roughly and spun her around. Within seconds, cold metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Maya's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay composed. She knew better than to resist or escalate the situation. Still, anger simmered beneath the surface. How could they treat her like this? She hadn't done anything wrong. Yet, as the officers shoved her into the back seat of the cruiser, she realized this wasn't about evidence or logic. It was about prejudice. As the police car sped away, Maya sat silently, in the cramped space, staring out the window. Memories of her training flooded her mind. She had been prepared for situations like this, moments when her identity might be questioned or her rights violated. But knowing how to handle it intellectually didn't make the experience any less infuriating. She replayed the events in her head, analyzing every detail. Why had they targeted her specifically? Was it because of her race? Or was it simply bad luck? Whatever the reason, Maya knew she couldn't let her emotions get the better of her. There would be time to address this injustice later. For now, she needed to focus on staying calm and figuring out her next move. Back at the precinct, chaos erupted almost immediately. One rookie cop, Officer Daniels, recognized Maya's face the moment she was brought in. He remembered seeing her photo during a joint training exercise months ago. At the time, she had been introduced as a liaison between the CIA and local law enforcement. Daniels froze, his stomach sinking as he realized what had just happened. Without wasting a moment, he pulled aside his sergeant and whispered urgently, "Sir, I think we made a huge mistake. That woman, they arrested her, is CIA." The sergeant's face went pale. Are you sure? Positive, Daniels replied. I saw her file myself. If we don't fix this soon, we're going to have a major crisis on our hands. Word spread quickly through the station. Panic set in as higher-ranking officials scrambled to verify Maya's identity. Calls were made, emails sent, and within hours, federal agents arrived in full force. They demanded answers, their voices sharp and unforgiving. It became clear that this wasn't just a routine arrest gone wrong. It was a disaster waiting to explode. And for the two officers who had detained Maya, the consequences would be severe. Meanwhile, Maya remained silent, refusing to speak until her lawyer arrived. She knew better than to engage directly with the officers who had wrongfully accused her. Every word she said could be twisted against her, especially in such a hostile environment. So she waited, her mind racing with strategies. She thought about the bigger picture, how incidents like this perpetuated systemic racism and reinforced stereotypes. She thought about the countless others who had faced similar treatment, but lacked the resources or connections to fight back. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message that no one, not even law enforcement, was above accountability. By midnight, the situation had spiraled out of control. News of the botched arrest leaked to the media, sparking outrage across the country. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like "Justice for Maya" and "End Racial Profiling." Protesters gathered outside the precinct, holding candles and signs, demanding justice for the black woman who had been unlawfully detained. Inside, tensions ran high as investigators combed through records, uncovering a disturbing pattern of misconduct among the arresting officers. Complaints of racial profiling and excessive force piled up, painting a damning portrait of a department plagued by bias and corruption. For Maya, the night stretched endlessly, each hour heavier than the last. But amidst the turmoil, she found solace in one undeniable truth. She had the power to change things. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. The police station was buzzing with activity when Maya arrived, her hands still cuffed behind her back. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh glow across the dingy walls, illuminating posters about community safety and outdated flyers, promoting neighborhood watch programs. Officers moved briskly around the precinct, some glancing curiously at Maya as she was led to a small interrogation room. She sat down on a cold metal chair, her expression unreadable. Despite the injustice of her situation, Maya remained calm, almost eerily so. Her training had taught her how to compartmentalize her emotions, and right now, she needed clarity more than anything else. Inside the room, the two officers who had arrested her wasted no time trying to intimidate her. "Let's start from the beginning," one of them said gruffly, slamming a file folder onto the table. "You were seen near the scene of a robbery earlier tonight. Care to explain that?" Maya raised an eyebrow, her voice steady. "I already told you, I've been at the library all evening. I didn't commit any crime, and I wasn't anywhere near where this supposed robbery took place." "Funny thing is," the second officer interjected, leaning forward aggressively, "we checked your alibi. Your supervisor confirmed you left work around 7 p.m., but nobody can vouch for what happened after that." Maya clenched her jaw but kept her composure. "That's because I was walking home alone. Are you saying it's illegal to walk in my own neighborhood now?" The officers exchanged a glance, their frustration evident. They weren't used to dealing with someone as composed as Maya. Most people would have crumbled under the pressure by now, yelling, crying, or pleading for mercy. But Maya wasn't most people. She knew exactly what they were doing, attempting to rattle her enough to slip up. Unfortunately for them, she wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. As the questioning dragged on, whispers began circulating among the other officers stationed nearby. One rookie cop, Officer Daniels, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had been assigned to desk duty that night, filing paperwork in the corner of the precinct. When he overheard snippets of the conversation coming from the interrogation room, his curiosity got the better of him. Peering through the partially open door, he caught a glimpse of the woman sitting inside, and froze. Daniels recognized her immediately. Just months earlier, he had attended a joint training session hosted by federal agencies. During the event, several high-ranking intelligence operatives had been introduced, including a black woman named Maya Johnson. At the time, she had been described as a key figure within the CIA, responsible for handling sensitive operations both domestically and internationally. Daniels remembered being struck by her quiet confidence and sharp mind. Now, seeing her handcuffed and treated like a common criminal made his stomach churn. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to speak up. After all, what could he possibly say? "Hey guys, I think we just arrested someone really important." It sounded absurd, even in his head, but the longer he waited, the worse the situation seemed to become. Finally, unable to ignore his instincts, Daniels approached Sergeant Miller, the highest-ranking officer currently on duty. "Sir," Daniels whispered urgently, pulling the sergeant aside. "I need to talk to you about the woman we brought in tonight." Sergeant Miller frowned, clearly, annoyed by the interruption. "What about her?" "I'm pretty sure she's CIA," Daniels blurted out, lowering his voice further. "I saw her during a training seminar last year. She's not just some random person. We could be in serious trouble here." For a split second, Sergeant Miller looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His face drained of color as the weight of Daniels' words sank in. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Yes, sir," Daniels replied firmly. "I'd bet my badge on it." Without another word, Sergeant Miller stormed toward the interrogation room, leaving Daniels standing there, heart pounding. Inside, the two arresting officers were still grilling Maya, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. When the sergeant burst in, his face red with anger, they both snapped to attention. "What's going on here?" he demanded, glaring at them. "Who authorized this arrest?" one of the officers stammered, clearly caught off guard. "We received a tip that she matched the description of a suspect. We followed protocol." "Protocol?" Sergeant Miller barked. "You're telling me you arrested someone based on a vague description without verifying the facts first? Do you have any idea who this woman is?" Before the officers could respond, Maya spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "If it helps, you can call my handler at Langley. I'm sure they'll confirm everything you need to know." Dandia. Room fell silent. Even the sergeant seemed momentarily stunned by her boldness. For a few seconds no one moved or spoke. Then slowly Sergeant Miller turned to the officers. "Get these cuffs off her now." It didn't take long for news of the botched arrest to spread throughout the precinct. Within minutes, everyone knew the seemingly ordinary black woman they had detained was actually a high-ranking CIA operative. Panic rippled through the station as officers scrambled to figure out what to do next. Some tried to downplay the incident, insisting it was just a misunderstanding. Others openly panicked, muttering about lawsuits and career-ending consequences. Meanwhile, Maya sat quietly in the waiting area, watching the chaos unfold with a mix of amusement and disdain. Her silence only added to the tension. Every time someone approached her to apologize or offer an explanation, she simply nodded politely without saying much. She understood the gravity of the situation better than anyone else in the room. This wasn't just about her. It was about exposing the deeply ingrained biases and systemic failures that allowed such mistakes to happen in the first place. And while part of her wanted to lash out, she also recognized the importance of staying calm and letting events play out naturally. By midnight, federal agents began arriving en masse. Clad in dark suits and carrying briefcases, they swept into the precinct like a tidal wave, demanding answers and threatening disciplinary action against everyone involved. Their presence sent shockwaves through the department, turning what had started as a routine arrest into a full-blown crisis. The two officers who had detained Maya were pulled aside for questioning, their faces pale with fear. Higher-ups huddled, in private meetings, frantically brainstorming ways to mitigate the damage. Yet amidst all the commotion, Maya remained a pillar of strength. She refused to let anger consume her, focusing instead on the bigger picture. She thought about the countless others who had faced similar treatment but lacked the resources or connections to fight back. She thought about the young black men and women who had been wrongfully profiled, brutalized, or killed by law enforcement. And she vowed to use this moment, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. As dawn broke over Maplewood, it became clear that nothing would ever be the same again. By the time the sun began to rise over Maplewood, the fallout from Maya's arrest had escalated into a full-blown scandal. The precinct was in disarray, with federal agents taking charge of the investigation and local officers scrambling to distance themselves from the debacle. The two arresting officers, Officer Harris and Officer Reynolds, were at the center of the storm. They had gone from being confident enforcers of the law to trembling figures standing on the brink of ruin. Their faces were pale, their hands shaking as they recounted the events of the previous night under intense scrutiny. Federal investigators wasted no time grilling the pair. Sitting in separate interrogation rooms, both men found themselves subjected to relentless questioning. "Why did you stop her?" one agent demanded, his voice sharp and unrelenting. "What evidence did you have to justify an arrest?" Harris stammered, trying to defend himself. "We got a call about a suspect matching her description near the robbery scene. She fit the profile." "Profile?" The agent shot back, slamming a file onto the table. "You mean because she's black? Is that what you're saying?" Reynolds, meanwhile, was struggling to keep his composure. In the other room, he argued that they were just doing their jobs, following standard procedure. But his excuses fell flat. Investigators presented him with a mountain of evidence showing a pattern of racial profiling in his past arrests. Complaints from citizens who claimed they had been unfairly targeted piled up like bricks, each one chipping away at his credibility. By the end of the interrogation, Reynolds looked like a man defeated, his head bowed as he realized the gravity of his actions. Back in the main area of the precinct, Sergeant Miller tried desperately to regain control of the situation. He gathered his team for an emergency meeting, his face etched with stress. "This is bad," he admitted, pacing back and forth. "Really bad. We need to cooperate fully with the feds if we want any chance of salvaging this department's reputation." But it was already too late. Word of the botched arrest had leaked to the media, and within hours, news outlets across the country were running headlines about the incident. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags like "Clarn Justice for Maya" and "Darn End Racial Profiling" trended nationwide, drawing attention not only to Maya's case but also to the broader issue of systemic racism in law enforcement. Protesters began gathering outside the precinct, holding signs and chanting slogans. Some carried candles, while others waved banners bearing Maya's name. The crowd swelled throughout the morning, growing louder and more determined by the hour. Inside the station, tensions reached a breaking point. Officers whispered nervously among themselves, unsure of what would happen next. Some expressed sympathy for Maya, acknowledging that the arrest had been unjustified. Others clung to denial, insisting that the entire situation had been blown out of proportion. But even those who tried to downplay the incident couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Federal agents moved through the halls with purpose, confiscating files, reviewing body camera footage, and interviewing witnesses. It felt less like an investigation and more like an occupation. Amidst the chaos, Maya remained a quiet yet powerful presence. After spending hours waiting for her lawyer to arrive, she finally met with federal representatives to discuss how to proceed. Though she could have pressed charges against the officers personally, she chose a different path. Instead of seeking revenge, she decided to use her platform to advocate for change. Her decision wasn't made lightly. It came from years of witnessing injustice firsthand and understanding the importance of addressing root causes rather than just symptoms. As the day wore on, details about the officers' misconduct continued to surface. Internal reviews revealed that both Harris and Reynolds had histories of questionable behavior. Multiple complaints had been filed against them for excessive force, verbal abuse, and discriminatory practices. Yet, none of these allegations had ever led to meaningful consequences. Now, with the weight of public scrutiny bearing down on them, there was no way to sweep their actions under the rug. Both men were suspended without pay pending further investigation, and whispers circulated that criminal charges might follow. The fallout extended beyond the arresting officers. Sergeant Miller, once seen as a competent leader, faced mounting pressure to resign. Critics accused him of failing to address systemic issues within the department, allowing bias and misconduct to flourish unchecked. His attempts to deflect blame only made matters worse, painting him as out of touch and unwilling to take responsibility. By evening, he had submitted his resignation letter, leaving the department leaderless at a critical moment. Meanwhile, Maya's story gained national attention. Journalists flocked to Maplewood, eager to learn more about the woman at the heart of the controversy. At first, Maya declined interviews, preferring to let her lawyers handle communications. But as the protests grew larger and calls for reform echoed across the country, she realized she had an opportunity to amplify her message. She agreed to speak publicly, not to shame the officers or seek personal vindication, but to highlight the systemic problems that allowed such injustices to occur in the first place. Standing before a packed press conference later that afternoon, Maya addressed the crowd with poise and conviction. Dressed in a crisp suit, she spoke directly to the cameras, her words resonating deeply. "What happened to me last night wasn't an isolated incident," she began, her voice steady. "It's part of a much larger issue, a pattern of racial profiling and discrimination that has plagued our justice system for far too long. I'm here today not just for myself, but for every person who has ever been wrongfully targeted because of the color of their skin." Her speech struck a chord with millions of viewers. Social media lit up with messages of support, praising Maya for her courage and eloquence. Many saw her as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, individuals can stand up and demand accountability. For Maya, though, the praise wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was using her voice to spark real change. As night fell over Maplewood, the town seemed transformed. The streets buzzed with energy, filled with people determined to make their voices heard. Protesters marched peacefully, carrying banners and lighting candles in solidarity. Community leaders called for town hall meetings to discuss police reform, while activists organized workshops on combating racial bias. Even some officers within the department expressed a willingness to listen and learn, recognizing the urgent need for change. For Harris and Reynolds, however, the night brought little relief. Stripped of their badges and facing the prospect of criminal charges, they retreated to their homes consumed by guilt and fear. Friends and family distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Job prospects vanished overnight, leaving them with no clear path forward. As they sat alone in their respective living rooms, staring blankly at the walls, they couldn't help but reflect on the choices that had led them here. Had they been blinded by prejudice? Or simply careless in their duties? Whatever the reason, the damage was done, and there was no going back. Maya, on the other hand, returned to her quiet apartment feeling a mix of exhaustion and resolve. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Advocacy work required patience, persistence, and sacrifice. But she also knew that moments like this, when the world paid attention, were rare and precious. If she could channel the momentum of this moment into lasting change, then everything she had endured would be worth it. And so, as she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, Maya dreamed not of vengeance, but of a future where no one else would have to experience what she had gone through. The days following Maya's arrest turned into weeks, and the ripple effects of the incident continued to spread far beyond Maplewood. The story dominated headlines nationwide, sparking heated debates about racial profiling, police accountability, and systemic injustice. News anchors dissected every detail, while talk show hosts invited experts, activists, and even former law enforcement officers to weigh in. Social media remained ablaze with discussions as people shared their own experiences of discrimination at the hands of authorities. For many, Maya's case wasn't just an isolated event. It was a glaring example of a much larger problem. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was tense and demoralizing. Without Sergeant Miller to lead them, the department struggled to maintain order. Officers avoided eye contact with one another, their usual camaraderie replaced by awkward silences and whispered conversations. Some feared they might be next, targets of scrutiny or accusations. Others grew defensive, insisting they had done nothing wrong and blaming the federal agents for overreacting. Morale plummeted, and public trust in the department hit rock bottom. Residents who once felt safe calling the police now hesitated, unsure whether reaching out would result in help or harm. Meanwhile, Harris and Reynolds faced mounting consequences for their actions. Their suspension quickly escalated to termination, after internal investigators concluded that their decision to arrest Maya had been based on racial bias rather than credible evidence. Both men were stripped of their pensions and barred from working in law enforcement again. The humiliation was unbearable. They became pariahs in their community, shunned by neighbors and strangers alike. Job applications went unanswered, and even basic errands like grocery shopping turned into gauntlets of judgmental stares and muttered insults. Their families bore the brunt of the fallout too. Harris's wife filed for divorce, unable to cope with the shame and financial strain. His teenage son stopped speaking to him altogether, too embarrassed to face classmates who mocked him online. Reynolds fared no better. His elderly mother fell ill under the stress, forcing him to take on her medical bills despite having no income. At night, both men lay awake, replaying the events of that fateful evening in their minds. They couldn't shake the image of Maya sitting calmly in the interrogation room, her composure unshaken even as their world crumbled around them. For Maya, life slowly began returning to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could get after such a traumatic experience. She resumed her duties at the library, greeting patrons with the same warm smile she always had. To outsiders, she appeared unfazed, but those who knew her well noticed subtle changes. She spoke more openly about social justice issues during staff meetings, encouraging colleagues to attend workshops on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity. She also started mentoring young Black women in the community, offering guidance and support to those navigating similar challenges. Her advocacy work expanded beyond Maplewood as well. Invitations poured in from organizations across the country, asking her to speak at rallies, conferences, and panel discussions. Each time she accepted, Maya used the opportunity to highlight systemic racism and push for meaningful reform. "This isn't about me," she often emphasized. "It's about creating a system where everyone is treated fairly, regardless of race, gender, or background." Her message resonated deeply, earning her widespread admiration and respect. One particularly impactful moment came when Maya testified before Congress as part of a hearing on police reform. Standing at the podium, she recounted her ordeal in vivid detail, describing how it felt to be handcuffed and thrown into the back of a police cruiser simply because of the color of her skin. Lawmakers listened intently, some visibly moved by her testimony. When she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause, a rare occurrence in such a divided political climate. Her words helped shape legislation aimed at increasing transparency in law enforcement and holding officers accountable for misconduct. Back in Maplewood, the protests showed no signs of slowing down. What had started as a small gathering outside the precinct evolved into a full-fledged movement. Local leaders joined forces with national activists to organize marches, workshops, and educational campaigns. Schools incorporated lessons on racial equity into their curriculums, while businesses pledged to implement diversity training programs for employees. Even the mayor issued a formal apology to Maya, vowing to make Maplewood a model for inclusive policing practices. Despite the progress, not everyone welcomed the changes. Some residents, particularly older, white conservatives, resented what they saw as unnecessary interference in their way of life. They argued that the reforms went too far, accusing activists of vilifying all police officers instead of targeting bad apples. Tensions occasionally flared, leading to heated arguments at town hall meetings and confrontations on social media. But these dissenting voices were drowned out by the overwhelming majority who supported reform. As months passed, the impact of Maya's courage became undeniable. The two officers responsible for her arrest faded from public view, reduced to cautionary tales and discussions about accountability. Their downfall served as a stark reminder that prejudice, whether intentional or subconscious, had real-world consequences. Meanwhile, Maya emerged as a beacon of hope and resilience. Her story inspired countless others to stand up against injustice, proving that even in the darkest moments, light could prevail. By the one-year anniversary of her arrest, Maplewood looked different. New policies ensured that officers underwent rigorous anti-bias training before hitting the streets. Body cameras were mandatory, and footage was reviewed regularly to identify potential misconduct. Community oversight boards gave citizens a voice in shaping police practices, fostering greater accountability and trust. While there was still work to be done, the transformation was undeniable, and it all started with Maya's refusal to stay silent. Reflecting on everything that had transpired, Maya felt a mix of emotions. There were times when anger threatened to consume her, especially when she thought about how easily her life could have been destroyed by those prejudiced cops. But more often than not, she felt pride, not just in herself, but in the community that had rallied behind her. Together, they had turned a tragic incident into a catalyst for change. And though the fight for equality was far from over, Maya knew one thing for certain: she had made a difference. That knowledge alone was enough to keep her going, fueling her determination to continue advocating for a fairer, kinder world. A year had passed since Maya's wrongful arrest, and Maplewood was almost unrecognizable. The once sleepy suburb had transformed into a hub of activism and reform, drawing attention from cities across the nation. People came to see how a small town had managed to turn tragedy into triumph, eager to learn from its example. The streets buzzed with energy as volunteers handed out flyers promoting upcoming workshops on racial equity, while murals dedicated to social justice adorned the walls of local businesses. At the center of it all stood Maya Johnson, a quiet librarian by day and an unstoppable advocate for change by night. The reforms implemented in Maplewood became a blueprint for other communities grappling with similar issues. Body cameras were now standard equipment for every officer, and footage was reviewed not just for accountability, but also for training purposes. Officers who exhibited biased behavior weren't simply reprimanded. They were required to undergo intensive counseling and education programs designed to address the root causes of their actions. Community oversight boards gained real power, holding regular meetings where residents could voice concerns directly to law enforcement leaders. These changes didn't happen overnight. They were hard-fought victories born out of relentless advocacy and collaboration. Maya played a pivotal role in shaping these policies. While she avoided the spotlight whenever possible, her presence loomed large over every discussion. She attended countless meetings, offering insights rooted in both her personal experience and professional expertise. Her dual identity as a CIA operative gave her unique credibility. No one questioned her ability to understand complex systems or navigate high-stakes situations. When she spoke, people listened, not because she demanded attention, but because her words carried weight. Her testimony before Congress had been particularly impactful. Lawmakers cited her story when drafting new legislation aimed at addressing systemic racism within law enforcement. Known as the Equity in Policing Act, the bill mandated federal funding for anti-bias training, established independent review boards in every state, and created a national database to track instances of police misconduct. Critics called it overly ambitious, arguing that it placed undue burdens on departments already stretched thin. But supporters saw it as long overdue progress, crediting Maya with inspiring its creation. Despite the accolades, Maya remained grounded. She knew better than anyone that laws alone couldn't erase centuries of inequality. Real change required shifting mindsets, challenging deeply ingrained beliefs and behaviors that perpetuated discrimination. That's why she focused much of her energy on education, partnering with schools and community organizations to teach young people about empathy, inclusion, and allyship. She often visited classrooms, sharing stories from her own life and encouraging students to speak up when they witnessed injustice. One memorable visit took place at Maplewood High School, where Maya addressed a packed auditorium of teenagers. Dressed casually in jeans and a blazer, she stepped onto the stage without fanfare, smiling warmly at the crowd. "I'm not here to lecture you," she began, her tone conversational yet firm. I'm here to remind you that your voices matter. You don't have to wait until you're older or qualified to make a difference. Change starts with ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Her message resonated deeply with the students, many of whom approached her afterward to thank her. Some shared their own experiences of being profiled or treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or socioeconomic status. Others expressed frustration at feeling powerless in the face of systemic inequities. Maya listened intently to each one, offering advice and encouragement. "You're stronger than you think," she told them. "And together, we can build a future that's fairer for everyone." While Maya worked tirelessly to drive change, Harris and Reynolds struggled to rebuild their shattered lives. Both men had moved out of Maplewood, unable to face the hostility they encountered daily. Harris found work as a janitor at a factory 2 towns over, keeping his head down and avoiding conversations with coworkers. He spent most evenings alone, drowning his sorrows in cheap beer and scrolling through old photos of happier times. His wife and son rarely reached out, and when they did, their calls were brief and strained. Reynolds fared slightly better, finding odd jobs here and there to make ends meet. Still, the guilt weighed heavily on him. Late at night, he would sit by the window staring at the stars and wondering if things could have turned out differently. What if he had taken a moment to question his assumptions? What if he had treated Maya with respect instead of suspicion? These questions haunted him, replaying endlessly in his mind like a broken record. Eventually, both men sought therapy, urged by friends or family members who recognized the toll their guilt was taking. In sessions, they confronted uncomfortable truths about themselves, the biases they hadn't realized they held, the harm caused by their actions. It wasn't easy. Some days they wanted to walk out and never return. But slowly, painfully, they began to heal. They started volunteering with organizations focused on restorative justice, hoping to make amends in whatever small ways they could. Neither believed they deserved forgiveness, but they hoped their efforts might prevent others from making the same mistakes. Back in Mapletown, the movement inspired by Maya continued to grow. Activists organized annual events to commemorate the anniversary of her arrest, using the occasion to celebrate progress while acknowledging the work still ahead. One such event featured a march through the heart of the city, culminating in a rally at the park where Maya delivered a powerful speech. Standing beneath a banner that read "Justice for All," she reminded the crowd that true equality required constant vigilance. "We've come so far," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "But let's not forget why we're here. We're here because someone decided to stand up and say enough is enough. We're here because ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. And we'll keep standing, keep fighting until every person, regardless of who they are or where they come from, is treated with dignity and respect." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the park and spilling out into the surrounding streets. For Maya, it was a moment of profound gratitude. She thought about the countless individuals who had joined her in this journey, activists, allies, lawmakers, and everyday citizens united by a shared vision of a better world. Together, they had achieved something remarkable, turning pain into purpose and despair into hope. As the rally drew to a close, Maya lingered behind, watching as families gathered to share meals and laughter. Children chased each other around the playground, their giggles filling the air. It was a simple scene, yet it filled her with immense pride. This was what she had fought for, a community where everyone belonged, where differences were celebrated rather than feared. There was still much to be done, of course, but for now Maya allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She smiled softly, knowing that even in the face of adversity, resilience could spark change, and change could transform the world. 2 years after Maya's wrongful arrest, Maplewood had become a symbol of hope and resilience. The town that once grappled with division and mistrust was now celebrated as a model for progress. News outlets from across the globe sent reporters to document its transformation, eager to understand how such meaningful change had taken root in a place many had written off as ordinary. Documentaries were filmed, articles were written, and awards were given, but none of it would have been possible without Maya's unwavering determination to turn tragedy into triumph. The reforms in Maplewood weren't perfect. No system ever is. But they represented a significant step forward. Police officers underwent rigorous training not only in de-escalation techniques, but also in cultural sensitivity and implicit bias. Body cameras were mandatory, and footage was reviewed regularly by independent oversight boards staffed with community members. Officers who demonstrated exceptional fairness and compassion were publicly recognized, while those who violated policies faced swift consequences. Transparency became the cornerstone of law enforcement in Maplewood, fostering trust between residents and the department. Maya continued to play an integral role in shaping these changes, though she always insisted the credit belonged to the collective effort of the community. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes, attending meetings, drafting proposals, and mentoring young activists. Her influence extended far beyond Maplewood, as cities nationwide adopted similar reforms inspired by her advocacy. Yet despite her growing fame, Maya remained humble. To her, this wasn't about personal glory. It was about creating a world where no one else would have to endure what she had gone through. One of the most profound outcomes of her work was the establishment of the Equity in Policing Act, which had been signed into law 6 months earlier. The bill marked a historic milestone in the fight against systemic racism within law enforcement. It allocated federal funds to support anti-bias initiatives, mandated diversity training for all officers, and created a national database to track misconduct. Critics argued it didn't go far enough, pointing out loopholes and potential challenges in implementation. But supporters hailed it as a critical first step toward lasting reform. For Maya, the passage of the act was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt immense pride knowing her story had contributed to such monumental change. On the other hand, she couldn't help but think about all the lives lost or ruined because society had waited so long to address these issues. She often found herself reflecting on the countless others who hadn't had the resources or opportunities to fight back, those whose voices had been silenced forever. Their memories fueled her resolve to keep pushing forward. As part of her ongoing efforts, Maya launched a nonprofit organization called Voices Unbound, dedicated to empowering marginalized communities. The initiative provided legal aid, educational resources, and leadership training to individuals affected by discrimination. It also partnered with schools to develop curriculums focused on social justice, ensuring future generations grew up understanding the importance of equity and inclusion. Within months, Voices Unbound gained widespread recognition, attracting donations and volunteers from across the country. Harris and Reynolds, meanwhile, continued their quiet journeys toward redemption. Both men had moved to different states, seeking fresh starts away from the shadow of their past mistakes. Harris eventually found work as a security guard at a warehouse, a job that allowed him to contribute without wielding authority over others. He spent his free time volunteering at a local food bank, finding solace in helping those less fortunate. Though he rarely spoke about his experiences, he carried the lessons he'd learned in therapy with him every day, striving to be more mindful and empathetic. Reynolds took a slightly different path. After months of soul-searching, he decided to pursue a degree in social work, determined to use his second chance to make a positive impact. Balancing classes and part-time jobs was challenging, but he persevered, driven by the belief that he owed it to himself and to Maya to do better. During breaks, he participated in restorative justice programs, speaking candidly about his failures in hopes of preventing others from repeating them. His honesty resonated with audiences, earning him invitations to speak at conferences and workshops. Though neither man sought forgiveness, they both hoped their actions might serve as examples of accountability and growth. They understood they could never undo the harm they had caused, but they believed small steps toward repair were worth taking. For Maya, their efforts were proof that even those who commit grave errors can find ways to contribute positively, if given the opportunity. Back in Maplewood, life settled into a rhythm of purposeful progress. The annual commemoration of Maya's arrest evolved into a celebration of unity and resilience, drawing visitors from around the world. This year's event featured a mural unveiling, a vibrant piece of art depicting diverse hands reaching toward a brighter future. Maya stood beside the artist as the crowd cheered, tears glistening in her eyes. It was a moment of reflection, gratitude, and renewed commitment to the cause. That evening, as fireworks lit up the sky, Maya retreated to her apartment for some much-needed solitude. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the bursts of color illuminate the night. Her mind wandered back to that fateful evening 2 years ago. The fear, the anger, the disbelief. She thought about how far she'd come since then, not just personally but collectively as a community. Though the scars of the past would always remain, Maya knew she had turned pain into power. She had used her voice to amplify others, proving that even in the darkest moments courage could spark change. As she sipped her tea and gazed at the stars, she whispered a silent promise to herself. This is just the beginning. And somewhere deep inside, she knew it was true.